everybody. Welcome to what we're calling Composers Live. This is the second time we're having a live interview with a composer, so we'll call it a series from now on. Today, I'm with James Allen Roberson. James, thanks for being here.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
I'll introduce James to you guys, and then part of the reason we're doing this live is so you guys can be a part of it. So it's not just us talking to each other quietly in our respective rooms, but like you guys can actually ask your questions. What do you want to know about kind of composers' education or day-to-day work or challenges on a project or whatever it is, you know, you guys are wondering about being a working composer. This is a good time to ask those questions. So James Roberson is a composer, sound designer, multi-instrumentalist working in film and television. He studied film scoring and composition at Berklee College of Music before moving to Los Angeles to start his professional career, working on projects with such composers as Deborah Lurie, Heitor Periera, and Guillaume Roussel, before landing a job as Rupert Gregson-Williams' assistant for 5 years. James made his solo composing breakthrough writing the music for the beloved DreamWorks Television animated series Spirit Riding Free, and has recently scored a run of feature films such as Heart of a Champion, The Dancing Queen, and Christmas with the Pups 2, Pups Alone, as well as the upcoming horror feature Piglet, coming out this spring. Additionally, James continues to provide his compositional, arranging, and instrumental skills to other composers and projects. So again, thanks for being here. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So went to Boston, went to Berklee College of Music, moved to LA, worked with Heitor, Rupert Gregson-Williams. That's my bio, actually, nice. A little bit. So I've been kind of looking forward to swapping notes on that. So yeah, I was at Remote. I was across the hall from Heitor. It was Michael's studio.
Yeah.
So we did a couple projects with him, which was so much fun. And then with Rupert, I worked on B-Movie as an assistant.
Oh, cool.
Forever ago.
So I've probably seen your sessions. Your little...
Maybe, yeah. What did I do on that? Yeah, I recorded some guitar tracks. So if you
cool.
ever had to dig into, there was some stuff I had to record for that. So maybe you did. That was very stressful.
I'll talk about that in a second. I'll tell you about an archaeological project I did for Rupert.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, I have a lot of questions, but I guess I don't know if people necessarily know, what does a composer's assistant do? Is that too broad a question to maybe?
No, I think it's broad in terms of the different composers, but I think there's a lot of connective tissue to talk about. The way I always would say to people, I would say like, we keep the lights on. That's sort of the shorthand version. It's like the composer writes the music, and then, or what I would also say sometimes is we're the mortar between the bricks. It's like you have all these well-defined jobs, and then the stuff that sort of makes the bricks stick together. You got a music editor, you've got a music supervisor, and we're the kind of stuff that keeps the wall standing. So that could be deliver files to the orchestrator that are cleaned up so that they can make charts, exporting audio stems for a recording or for a mix. Sometimes it's getting coffee. Sometimes it's getting coffee for a director who's coming, or setting up a cheese plate or whatever. But a lot of times it's...
Oh, we lost him for a second.
You know?
Sorry, you froze for a second there, but I think we get the general gist of it. Yeah, I felt like it was everything from taking out the trash to writing additional music was kind of like what got covered, which is a little absurd, but it was kind of like picking up food and sitting in on recording sessions, and both the most low profile and high profile aspects of the job. You get to see all of it, I guess.
Sometimes you're pouring some sort of cop via email too. Sometimes you're the good cop or the bad cop. Like there's a political aspect sometimes too, of like knowing what to say and what not.
Right. Yeah. I can remember some phone calls I've had to make. People used Michael's music without asking, and he was like, "Hey, why don't you make a phone call and check in on those cue sheets?" And yeah, that was my job. So we have a question. So guys, thank you for asking questions. It's actually 2 questions. But John P wants to know, what is your most favorite project you've worked on? Also, where do you find inspiration when starting on a blank canvas? So 2 very different things. Why don't we start with favorite project so far?
Well, let's see. Well, the coolest
Political.
project, I think, political. Yes, very political. No, I think the coolest project. No, I'll be real. I think there's two. The coolest one still, I'm waiting to have it beat, is The Crown. I worked on the first season with Rupert.
Nice.
And I did like the tiniest bit of additional, but mostly just being involved with it was really cool, and seeing this really good TV get made.
And also seeing
my
it
favorite,
get like well received and loved and everything.
Yeah.
It's been pretty awesome. Yeah.
When it came out and you could watch it and you'd be like, this is good. This is very good. That was great. I think my favorite is still Spirit Riding Free, because I had so much runway to, like, I did that for 2 years, and wrote dozens of hours of music of that. So developing themes, developing a language, develop these characters, this character comes back. It was so much material to work with, and by the end you're soaring. You have so much, you have a language, you have a full language, and I think that really worked well. And even there's sort of in the middle of the run, there are, at the end of, I think, season 4, there's 2 episodes that are kind of a part 1 and part 2, and then the next season has like a part 1, 2, and 3. And so I would always call that Spirit the movie, because it ends up being one big story that kind of connects this arc, and we treated it that way,
So
that
I'm assuming that it's related to the feature film, which Hans did, based on that, I think, right? That was So how was the pressure of taking over the Hans Zimmer franchise? I guess.
Well, I didn't knock on his door and tell him I was doing it. My mom got me when I got it, she got me the soundtrack, which I was already familiar with, of Spirit's Zimmer. The concept for that one was sort of using a lot of synths and things, and I tried to keep it more grounded. I don't want to, I tried to just ignore it for the most part, other than just the emotion that it gave. Like, I tried to go back to the words, not the music, if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah. Okay. So you didn't feel any pressure to kind of maintain anything, I guess. Yeah, that's good.
Well, other pressure. I felt other pressure,
sure,
but not
sure.
to make it sound like Hans. Yeah.
So the second part of that question was, where do you find inspiration when starting on a blank canvas? And that's maybe can follow up with Gregory's question, talking about developing themes and material. What is your process when writing? Start with paper? How does that all go?
I love those questions, and I think they're both related, and I think they can even be both related to the first part of that other question, which is the words, usually. And what I mean by the words, I don't know if we had a teacher at Berklee together, this guy Sheldon Mirowitz, but he would always talk about. You never had him? He was great. He was intense, let's say, but like in a good way. Like, people who liked him really liked him. And he would always say, watch something and then write down words like heroic or mysterious or for, whatever the words were.
Right. Oh, no, we froze again.
He would just talk about write descriptive words about what you watched. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so that's step 1 then, is to kind of translate it.
Yeah, and then you see where to go from there. So like with Spirit, there was a lot of, like, freedom was a big one. It was about being free, and so there's this expansiveness of like the American West, and you have this idea of free and fun, and you get a few of those words, and then you just try to sort of ask yourself what instruments, what melodies will start to evoke those.
I'm going to take some of these questions out of order. So speaking of that, Kristen asks, what instruments do you play and how many?
Most string instruments I can play. I started as a violinist. And then guitar is kind of my main instrument. I have a bass. I have some stuff here in the room. I'm a little compressed right now. I'm in a smaller studio than normal. But my most recent toy is I got.
Oh man,
I've been playing with that.
Sorry, you froze on. You said your most recent toy, and then I lost you for a second.
502. It's like a drum kit.
Oh, nice.
So that's been my most recent toy. Yeah.
Right.
But usually I'll start with guitar or piano on something, and then it will grow from there. And,
do you write directly in the DAW? Do you start in the DAW? I mean,
usually, yeah. Cubase.
Cubase. Okay. Yeah, that was my next question.
Yeah.
What's the DAW? Is that were you using Cubase already, or is that what Rupert uses and you adopted it?
I had a journey of Daws, as you probably did.
Sure.
At Berklee, it was digital performer. They would teach us digital performer, and then I had a job with a composer when I first moved to LA. He used digital performer, and then I learned Logic with Heitor.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
And then I learned Cubase with Guillaume, and then that was what Rupert used.
Okay. All right. So
that's
you're versatile in DAWs. You don't just have. That's the thing when you're an assistant. You don't use what you want. You use what they want. I guess. Right. So.
And not only that, I've my key commands. My key commands or Cubase. I mean, they've grown so much, but they're Rupert's. The core of it is Rupert's, and the core of his was Hans.
I still have Michael Levine's key commands in my Logic because that's what I learned on. And so when I have a student using Logic, I can't tell them. They're like, "What's the key command for this?" I'm like, I don't know. I'm afraid. Like it's different.
Yeah,
that's funny. I don't really think about that, but yeah, that's something I inherited all the way back.
Well, if people are interested, I'm a big advocate of, if you find yourself going to the menu more than 5 or 10 times, like in a few minutes, make a key command for it. Like I'm a big advocate of reducing friction in your writing. And so anything you're doing, I have a few peripherals, like I've got a little touch screen thing and stuff, but like anything you can do, I feel like to like get to the idea, to remove the junk in the way,
right.
And a lot of that is like go into the menu, like, no.
No, right. All right, I'm going to back up. I want to make sure I'm catching all these.
Let's
unrelated question. Charles Blakely asked, how do you approach music with less formal harmony that is building mood for a soundtrack? So this is we have an audience of composers here, so you're going to get theory questions.
I love it.
Like this. So I don't know exactly how to interpret less formal harmony, but I guess you're not.
I think if they want to elaborate, that's fine. But so you mentioned in the bio that I just did, and actually they surprise dropped Piglet, that horror movie.
Mm-hmm.
So that came out on like Fandango at Home, which used to be Voodoo, on like a couple Fridays ago. And that, talk about less formal harmony. A lot of that is like synth and noise building soundscapes and stuff.
So do you have a harmonic language you're using, or are you more just kind of, that's not even a thing?
I have a sonic language that I'm using. So I think that might be the core answer to the question, is like, instead of thinking of some of these instruments as notes, think of them as sounds, and then experiment with how the sounds interact. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. Do you ever? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying. So I hired my friend Jake, who's a woodwind player, on that, and I had him do like a big folder full of like altissimo squeals, because it's Piglet, and I said I want something large and high, like I want something fat squealing, and so he did baritone sax and bass clarinet, and he gave me these gnarly altissimos.
Okay, nice.
And then I made them into a contact instrument and had these different things, and he ran with it and put them through distortion and stuff. And so whether or not the notes work, the sound is so complex that you use the sound as an object. And okay, so when this happens, the sound comes in. So there's there is harmony in there. There are traditional themes and stuff, but a lot of it is these kind of smears of, like, I took the sound of like this, like, and then I slowed it down like 1,000% and made it into a pad, and that's not harmonic. Like, those are not in tune with each other. But that became creepiness, which is distinct from violence, you know. So in this horror movie, so they're thinking of them as objects, really, as sounds rather than notes, really freed me up to be creative, I feel like. Hopefully that answers the question.
Well, how about something like Christmas with the Pups, which probably is a little more traditional? How much are you kind of falling back on your theory, do you think?
On that one, a lot, I think. I really tried to do the John Debney, you know, like, you know, fun Christmas type thing. So I think, though, you use, okay, well, the pups are more heroic. There's like, because it's like Home Alone with dogs. So the pups are saving the day, and horns coming, and, you know, little pit strings when they're sneaking around. But then the bad guys have like a bass flute and a lot of sort of chromatic descending things. So you do have some formal harmonic contrast, a little bit more diatonic and a little bit more chromatic.
Right.
Yeah. For the baddies, you know.
Right. So you are still thinking about those things. Theory matters, I guess, is what I'm trying to.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm a big advocate for theory, but I also remember working for Rupert and kind of getting chastened a little bit. He's like, it has to work. You know, it has, like, you can't get so nerdy that it just doesn't work. And
work for the picture, meaning, I guess. Right. Like,
yeah, and I'll nerd out all day long.
Works theoretically, but yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, it has to work to picture. That's the thing about the film scoring stuff. But I could happily nerd. Like, I love progressive rock. Like, I could happily listen to Big Long Dance of Eternity or something. But it's not going to be, unless you're doing a very specific movie. That's not going to be what the chase scene is.
Right. You need to find that project. It's out there somewhere.
It is. Yeah, you know about that project.
Right.
Zach and Leo did Cobra Kai. That's the project.
That's the project. Okay.
That's the Dream Theater project.
Right. Okay. All right. Let's change gears. I'm hoping I'm catching all the questions. If I don't answer your question or ask it, just ask it again. Haya Music says, how do you handle situations where a director wants a different musical approach than what you envisioned?
I have a great story about that, I think.
Okay.
I'll try to condense it. So on Spirit, in the Spirit movie that I mentioned, the 5 episodes, there was a moment where, in the backstory of it, Lucky, the main character, her mother has died before the events of the series, so her father is raising her alone in the whole thing. And this 5-episode arc, is about her getting to know her grandparents, her mom's parents, and sort of getting to learn about her heritage. And her mom was a trick rider, like of horses. And so she's trying to follow literally in her mom's footsteps. There are these like boots that, you know, she got from her mom. And so there's this scene, and I promise this is the perfect story to relate to this, because it turned out so well. There's this moment where it's cutting back and forth from the past to her mom at her age, and then to her at her age. So the past and the present, and they're doing this like trick riding thing, and the cuts happen faster and faster, and eventually she's riding with her young mom, and it's like the timelines have just connected, and it's beautiful. You know, it's beautiful that it's like, and the director, or the producer, the showrunner, the person in charge, right? We're in a spotting meeting, which for those of you who don't know is like you're figuring out where the music goes and what the music is going to do. So we're in this meeting, and she says, I want it to be the biggest. I want, when they're together, I want that to just be glorious and be the biggest thing ever.
Sure.
But what happens right after that is it cuts back to the present, and then she jumps through this hoop of fire, and then everyone cheers. And I said, what if it's the smallest moment? I said, what if it's almost nothing when they're together? Which was absolutely the opposite of what she wanted, because, you know, because it's the emotional heart. And I sort of told an idea. I'm like, well, what if we, you know, we have it just be intimate and stuff? And then she said, great, go do it. And then I have to go do it. And that's, then I have to like sell it, right?
Well, when you're going to argue that, then you have to prove that you were right, I guess. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And that kind of relates to one of the questions earlier about coming up with ideas. It's like, I had a concept, but then I had to execute it. And what it ended up being was, when it cut to the past, I would have kind of a Spanish type thing, because she was this, you know, Mexican runaway who, you know, that was and then in the present, it was a bit more of the show's normal kind of orchestral Western palette. And it would cut back and forth. But when they were finally writing together, it was just synth, kind of a high violin and a woman's voice. And it was just singing like a mother, right? Like a lullaby. And it was the theme. And then it grew and grew and grew. And then it was a big orchestral climax after that moment. And it worked so well, but I had to sell it to the director. And I got a friend in to sort of mock up a thing to sing this thing and just kind of do these.
Exactly what I was going to ask. I was like, how did you demo it?
Yeah, I got a friend in to just do it. And it was just kind of this atmosphere with a mother singing to a daughter. Like, that was my concept. And then it sort of breaks and it becomes huge and glorious. But that was the smallest moment. I'm so proud of that. And I'm proud that I stuck to my guns, but I also am proud that I was able to sell it, because that's what you have to do. Because if you can't deliver on your idea, then you know,
then you're gonna have to make it the biggest thing you've ever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. So that's a good example where you just have to convince them. Some people are easier to convince than others. You know.
Right. Well, I guess you'd already been on the project for a while. There was trust, I think.
I think so. I think it helped. Yeah, but also there's usually a period where you can give demos. Like there were a few stop gaps. Like if I had fully face planted, we would have done something else.
Sure. Right.
Yeah. Or they would have gotten someone else.
Have you ever, I don't know, that you made me wonder, have you face planted? But
have I face planted?
Yeah.
I had not face planted, but a few earlier episodes. It was probably my like 6th or 7th episode of Spirit. It was a very epic episode. It was like a train gets, it was like a blizzard episode. It was like this huge epic, like they're going through like real life and death kind of thing. And almost like Apocalypse Now, because they're going down the track trying to find this train that is stopped because they're like horses and they're trying to rescue people. And so it's like going deeper and deeper and deeper into that. And I did something very kind of Wagnerian, and I think at first they didn't understand it, and we did a few passes because the supervisors thought it was pretty good. But
like
the
Riding
director,
the Valkyries kind of thing? Dun, 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 dun,
kind of, yeah. And almost more like, you know, these big chords, these big add 9 chords, kind of as, you know, you're going in like direness. And eventually we kind of tweaked it and found a middle ground, but it turned out really well. But at first that was, I don't know. I mean, if this is an audience of composers, everyone has that imposter syndrome where, you know, the next thing you're just like, oh, they're going to just look at me with a blank stare and say, you do this for a living, you know, like all of my fears about that were sort of for a day or so. I was like, oh yeah, this is that moment. But then it ended up being fine, and we tweaked it and got it to where everyone was happy. But I swung really hard for the fences, and then we kind of brought it back a little bit, but a lot of it still stayed. It was mostly the early stuff.
There's an interview on the first Gladiator movie, the DVD bonus features. There's an interview with Hans Zimmer, and he talks about, well, he says like he spends most of his time wondering when are they going to find him out and bring in a real composer. So he has that kind of imposter syndrome too. And I think about that whenever I hear of imposter syndrome, that even people at the top, you know, you could be Hans Zimmer and you can still be like, they're going to find me out one of these days. You know, what am I doing?
I had that talk with Rupert when I was kind of halfway through Spirit, and he was on Wonder Woman at the same time. and we had sushi together, and I was telling him that feeling. I said, so every other Friday I'm delivering an episode, which means every other Thursday I'm like cowering under my desk.
Right.
And, and I'm kind of maybe on some level fishing for like, oh, no, it gets, and then he goes, oh man, me too. And he starts telling me about all these rewrites on that huge No Man's Land queue. And my realization was, oh, if he feels that now, I'm never going to get over it. And it's just like a condition that you
never,
right?
Exactly.
Like having a heart condition, right? You just live with it.
This next question is relevant, so I'm going to take these out of order a little bit.
Yeah.
How long did it take you to actually feel comfortable calling yourself a composer? Or did you always feel like that was who you are from Eduardo?
Both. So I think that it wasn't until Spirit that I really felt like I could like with a straight face do that. But so I really loved Frank Zappa as a kid. He was the guy that I was like, oh, this guy is like, he calls himself a composer and like thinks of himself as a tradition within a tradition.
Right.
And so in that sense, I had been calling myself a composer since I was a teenager, but it wasn't kind of until I did a thing that would be out there that maybe people would know, where I sort of, I don't know, maybe owning is it probably not the right word, but where I felt like, oh, well, now I've actually sort of stepped into what I wanted to be. But I thought of myself as a composer for, whatever, 25 years, but it wasn't really until that I felt like I could wear it proudly, if that makes sense.
I mean, maybe it's not just an LA thing. I get it out here in the East Coast too, but I tell people I'm a composer. They're like, oh, what have you done that I've heard of? Do you get that question a lot?
Yes. And usually it's, I have to say Spirit, although, you, like you said, you mentioned B-movie, like you can say things you've worked on.
Things I assisted for, right.
Yeah. So like I can say, well, The Crown or something, but then if they ask a follow-up question, you're like, well, like 2M7, like,
exactly. There was this hi-hat part that was really sick, and I did,
Yeah, 2M7, that's my favorite.
Right.
Love it.
Let me back up a bit. So you mentioned Cubase. This is, like you said, you can nerd out. So Christian said, what software do you use? So deeper, you must use more than just Cubase.
Oh yeah, we all do. So I will nerd out a little bit. So you might know that what a lot of us do in the film stuff is we'll have like a picture sync session. Like Pro Tools will hold all the picture, and that will run alongside in parallel with Cubase. And a lot of times, as you might remember from remote control, that's on a separate computer, right?
You still running it that way?
No, sort of. I switched it. I use Pro Tools to deliver, and I'm pretty proficient. I'm pretty good at Pro Tools, but I actually use an older version of Cubase. So right now I'm using Cubase 12 and 13 respectively, and they're on the same computer and they're synced.
Okay. Why? Why aren't you just running the video inside your current version of Cubase?
So there's a couple of reasons. And also, additionally, over the last few years, I've been using VideoSync to host the video, and that's also running. There's a couple of reasons. I think of the master session, the one that has all the picture in dialogue and stuff. I think of that as like my sketch score paper. That's my playground. That's where it all goes in. And so the reason that there's a whole session with everything is you can music edit, you can grab a little bit of something, you can try things out, cut things, slow things down. And also each of the main Cubase session you use, where you're actually writing and using MIDI and stuff, those just all correspond. I'm trying to think how to say it. Like they all correspond to different cues within the larger session. So, one is like the catch-all, everything just kind of comes down the sluice and goes where it needs to go. But then, you can write a big cue and say, what if I grab the middle of that and bring it here? You can do that in that other session without having to deal with the MIDI and stuff. So there's there's a freedom. There's kind of an ease and a freedom to having everything all in one session next to the detailed session you're writing, because then you can experiment and try things out. It's also great if you're on a project with multiple composers. you bring in all these other people's stuff and hear how your cue relates to the next one. So there's a lot of advantages to having the main session, but I'm using it also cue-based, same key commands, same,
right. Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah.
What about sample libraries?
Sample libraries. I love a lot of Spitfire stuff, but also, and you probably have some of these, a lot of the Air stuff, the old stuff is kind of foundational. And then you add on like cinematic scoring strings or Cinebrass or, gosh, like Albion, I guess that's Spitfire too, but just a lot of, I guess I'll go through my main stuff. I love Cinebrass and Spitfire Brass. I love cinematic studio strings. I love Berlin woodwinds. And then I've just got kind of some random like Cineperk stuff, and then a bunch of the sort of Air Giga contact converts,
So all pretty, I think, well-known, reliable stuff, it sounds like. I think nothing.
Yeah.
There's no secret, like, oh, I've got this violin that nobody else knows about, and it's the best.
No. The stuff that is like that is stuff I make usually. I'll do a little, when we would do stuff for Rupert, we would have kind of server folders like cues and documents and all these different things. And one would be called sounds and setup. And a lot of times at the beginning of each project, we kind of like sample stuff. Oh, I will relate to what you said at the very beginning. You were like doing some guitar and B-movie. I probably heard some of your guitars because at one point we were doing some Sandler stuff, probably Grown Ups 2 or something with Rupert. And he's like, can you go through all these old sessions and like find where like probably you just find charango, guitar, ukulele, like loops, like find phrases, right? Like that are like, a motor, and grab them and put them into a contact, like make them usable. And I made this monster contact instrument that had like time synced loops of like things. And it's so useful for comedy and for, action and things, just like, just this little, nice. And so I'll have to look at the files, but you're probably in there.
I'll clarify. It was Michael played. I was the engineer. Just to, okay. It sounds like I realized why it sounded like maybe I played it, but no, I was just.
Then you probably recorded something, or something
probably,
like
yeah, probably, or something Heitor did, or something, yeah.
But like that's so useful, and it's like cool. Using every part of the buffalo,
Yeah, I'm not sure people know how common custom instruments are. I remember building a lot of those. Actually, I built, maybe it was for Rupert. There was like a choir instrument or a vocalist. I think I made for Rupert once. That was like a singer came in and sang do or do or something across like 24 pitches, and I made a contact instrument out of it.
Probably have,
and that's pretty common on projects, is to kind of make something custom, and then maybe that custom instrument becomes part of your palette for the next project. But it's definitely, it's a thing people do. It's not just the stuff you buy off the shelf.
It's true. That will be.
Oh no. I lost him for a second there. Sorry, we lost you for a moment. You're back though.
Some stuff usually gets mixed in with the normal stuff, but the custom stuff helps give your project an identity that no one else has.
Right. Do you make your own synth patches?
I tweak and I make my own stuff.
I think that's adequate.
I do sometimes. I don't have it in here, but I've got a Dreadbox modular. I have my little modular.
Nice.
Up here, but it's down in the garage right now. But what I'll often do is I'll make a patch, or I'll make something that it does, and then I'll record a bunch of those, and then I'll make an instrument, a contact out of that. So it's kind of a hybrid.
Yeah, nice. All right, let me back up a little bit. Again, if I missed your question, just ask your question again. Do you find it easy to call a score complete? I mean, deadlines help with that. Or do you keep tweaking it until someone forces you off of it?
That's the best question. And yeah, I don't know if I could even finish. I for years, especially when I was working with Rupert, I struggled with finishing things. Deadlines make you finish things, period.
Mhm.
Deadlines are awesome. Get a deadline. If you
Right.
want to finish something, get a deadline. One of my friends who he worked with Jimmy Levine for many years and did a lot of TV and stuff. And he was a Berklee guy too, and we came up together. One of the things that I would say a lot is there's a difference between writing and writing fast, like that they're different muscles almost. It's like I had a friend at Berklee who's a drummer, and he said there's certain things you can't practice slow, like physically. Like you just have to play them kind of fast and slowly, and then you get better. And as a guitarist, that was such a weird concept. You know,
Because you're told to slow down the metronome and
yeah.
right.
But I felt that there was an analogy between that, like writing to a deadline. Like I think that writing to a deadline on some level is a difference in kind than just writing. There is something that's fundamentally different about it.
Nice. Can you show us that mug again real quick? Kristen wanted to
Yeah.
what was on there?
It is a Prophet. It is a Dave Smith Prophet mug.
Right. Very nice.
Yeah, I love it.
Right.
I've got a plug-in of that.
That's awesome. You drink it up. And Kristen also asked, what kind of music education do you have? So you just mentioned Berklee, maybe before Berklee, and then include Berklee in that answer.
Sure. I started with Suzuki violin when I was 4 years old and playing, pepperoni pizza and all that kind of stuff. And I did that. I took those formal lessons. Over the course of that time, my dad became a Suzuki classical guitar teacher, but he also taught other guitar. He taught for a brief period of time, taught electric guitar in the early 2000s. And so I had guitars in the house, and I just started playing those. So I was mostly self-taught with guitar, but I had guitars in the house. Yeah, I was. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
As was I.
But I sort of took up piano around the same time as I was playing guitar. Like I never took lessons. I just kind of had a little keyboard around, so I would just sort of slowly pick around on it until I got okay at it over the years.
Did you keep up with the violin through all that?
Yeah. The short answer is no. The long answer is it's still very useful to me. I record it and I sample it. In fact, going back to what we were talking about, let's see. Sorry, you still there?
Oh, yeah. I'm here.
Oh yeah. No, so there's this sound at the very beginning of Rupert's The Legend of Tarzan cue, and the very beginning of the movie. And it's my violin.
Nice.
And it's like this kind of ponticello type, squealy thing with some mandolin, and that's so it's like I do creative things with the violin rather than like playing in tune all the time.
You're not playing the soaring melodies necessarily.
No. I'll hire someone else to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Nice. That's cool. I'm trying to think. Oh, okay. So that brings us through. What about like high school? Were you in orchestra or anything like that?
Yeah. So I did not do orchestra in middle school, but in high school I decided to, and I had a really good teacher. I was just thinking about him yesterday, actually. He knew basically freshman year, first day I came in and I told him, hey, I play guitar. That's what I'm interested in, but I play violin. And he said, okay, well, you come in, you play violin, and he goes, well, in the spring we do these like pop concerts. We do like the Valentine's concerts. So you can play that stuff. Mm-hmm. And I said, okay, cool. And I came in and I sat in and did my level best with the violin. And I was like the back of the second violins, at that point. But that was around the time that I was getting into Zappa and was into orchestral music. And so just being literally in an orchestra taught me so much about writing for orchestra. And maybe probably the next year I started arranging and doing writing for orchestra, and the teacher would be like, oh, well, let's play it. Let's do this stuff. And I would do arranging and writing. So
Nice.
talk about an education.
Right. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. Well, it's also encouraging for people, I think, to hear that you can be in the back of the second violins and still become a composer. Like,
honestly, I'd say the majority of composers are like,
yeah,
we spread too thin, we spread ourselves too thin. We're not like, so, and like a lot of my friends who are way better than me, like I had a band at Berklee and I was the worst one in it, but I wrote all the music.
Right. That's awesome.
Yeah.
This question had me second guess for a second, but then I realized what it was. Do you ever experience bouts of gear acquisition syndrome, gas, where you can't stop, like Black Friday comes around? I feel like I get over it for a few years and it creeps back in. I'll go on a spending spree. It sounds like, I mean, because you mentioned the sample libraries you're using are all kind of the bread and butter stuff, so that maybe you don't have this problem. I don't know.
I think it's literal gear. I am. It's exactly like what they're saying. It's like about every now and then,
Right.
like I'll have a project. I'm like, what would be great? Like a Schecter or something, getting some new guitar or something, or like a new amp, or like I said earlier, that drum kit.
Right. So yes, you do have your
every now and
room is
then,
getting smaller and smaller as things come in.
Yeah, and it's funny because like I said before the thing, like I'm doing a build out in my garage for a studio. So right now I'm in this office. So there's not room for half of the stuff, my stack amps and things like that. So a little bit curtailed, although I did get that drum kit. So I don't know. I think it's fits. Usually I like to say, like I'll go to NAMM and I'll say, I've got stuff at home. I'll have that other side of it.
Right. Got stuff at home. Do you enjoy going to NAMM?
I do. I enjoy it more socially now, but it is cool to see what people are making and like, oh my God, like, if you get 1, 2, or 3 good ideas walking through NAMM, I think it's worth it.
Right.
I think you go, like, oh man, great. It is tiring. It hurts your legs.
Yeah. It's fun. I haven't been in a long time.
It is. I encourage anyone who hasn't been to go, though, for sure, because it's just, you've never seen anything like it in your life.
Right. If you guys don't know NAMM, it's, I don't remember, what is it? National American Music something? Is that
National Association of Music Merchants? Yeah.
It's all the new gear, or not even the new gear. It's all the gear you can imagine, and Cubase and Pro Tools, and everybody will have booths, and you'll just see so many cool shiny objects. It's definitely, if you have a gas problem, do not go to NAMM.
Yeah. Like, can I buy all of it?
People will buy like didgeridoos they never intended to, like people just walk out with like the craziest stuff. Really
actually fun. Here's the refutation of everything I just said. I totally got one of these the other day, like one of those like singing bowls.
Right.
I in no circumstances would I necessarily need this, but I'm like, it's a cool thing. It's
and the day's gonna come and you're gonna be like, yes, now I can use that bell. Yeah. I try not to get new gear unless I have the specific excuse. Like you said, like the guitar, I was like, for this, I need a Telecaster and the project will pay for it. Then I feel like, okay, I can go out and buy it. I don't usually just do it on its own.
I have the weirdest version of that. I was doing additional with a friend of mine on this tennis documentary. And it was like this epic one. It was like this guy who was a tennis player in the Weimar Republic. So there was like, the buildup. And he had this idea, like we sampled a tennis player like playing, and we did a whole big sampling session at a tennis court and had like and Alvin, we recorded it and we had fluffy boom mics and stuff, and we used the sound in it as percussion. But we bought a tennis racket and we broke it. And like an old tennis racket, and used it as like percussion. And so like that's gear. That's we made gear, a contact library of creaking, cracking tennis.
That's some custom stuff. So how much time do you spend, do you think, on the custom instruments? It sounds like you're pretty into it. I guess.
If I know I'm going to be on a thing a few weeks before, I try to spend a week or so figuring out I'll do two things actually. I will take my normal template and I'll go through and I'll pick sounds that already kind of exist and try to come up with something like a vibe, like cull the stuff I'm probably not going to use and add in stuff that isn't part of my template. And then once I feel like I kind of have a vibe, I'm going to just go and try to add to that with custom stuff. It's like, I have this, but it would be great if I had this, and then I'll go grab something. And
right. So what a prep.
I'm trying to think. Yeah, there's this thing called Azm Bells. It's this Italian guy made this little box. You can see it online. Azzam. Google it, like Azm Bells. And it's like this box with all sorts of weird sort of metal pokey things on it. And you can bow it or whack it or do these things. And it's got a piezo pickup in it. So you can record it. And my buddy Christopher Willis, who I was renting studio space from for the last 8 years, he just had it there. Like he bought it and he didn't know what to do with it because he had gas, right? He just decided.
He just bought this thing.
And I went out there and I sampled the crap out of it. And honestly, the last 3 horror movies it's been so useful because you can like get these creepy bow things, but also there's this metal thing that I made into like a pitched pad. And I did that. I probably spent 3, 4, or 5 days on it. But it has paid for itself over and over, and it's not even mine. I sent him the samples. I said, hey, if you want to use these because it's yours,
right?
You can use them. But I stole its soul. I went in there and I just mentally,
right.
sucked out the usefulness of it, and it's super useful.
That's awesome. All right, I'm going to take it back to a music question or writing question.
Sure.
Do you ever get stuck in the piece? What do you do when that happens?
Yeah. I guess there's sort of 2 things connected in there. One is like with the deadline, sometimes you can't afford to really get stuck. You just have to I think sometimes getting stuck, I don't know, I don't want to get too philosophical about it, but it seems like getting stuck almost, assumes that you can sort of switch tracks or whatever. It's like, oh, well, like you could do something else. Like sometimes you just have to commit to something and call it done, which relates to the question much earlier.
Deadline.
But no, I mean, I get stuck all the time. Yeah, I get stuck all the time. And I will just try to go back to the words, usually go back to what am I actually trying to say? And then maybe you become less precious about the musical decisions and start thinking about the dramatic decisions. Because if you think about the dramatic decisions, the musical decisions will come. If you're serving the film, because if you think about it, I don't know, I mentioned, like Dream Theater or people like that, very, oh, nice. Oh, my dog downstairs being very good right now. When I mentioned like Dream Theater, a group that is known for being very technical and complicated, right?
Right.
But if you really look into their stuff, like only 1 or 2 things about it at any given time are maybe complicated. So, and the other decisions surrounding the interesting, complicated stuff or whatever are often very conventional, because if everything is complicated, it just becomes a mess. And I think that when you think dramatically, it frees you up from the pretension of trying to do this or that clever thing. And then you'll write. I don't know. Does that kind of make sense? Like you're writing with a non-musical purpose, and then you're just free to let your musical instinct guide you to that purpose. And then, you can edit and stuff later, and you can say, oh, well, what if I changed that cadence and made it whatever? But what got you to the finish line, I think, is not thinking about those interesting musical decisions, which I don't know if that's implied by the question, but if you're thinking about the dramatic decisions, you can get there in a maybe more simplistic way. And then you can, once you feel like you've done the dramatic stuff, then you can add the bells and whistles that you want to make it your own, make yourself feel satisfied. But that's the quickest way I get unstuck, is just thinking about how is this serving the mood, the vibe. What is this communicating what it needs to communicate.
Right. Yeah, man, I have a couple of thoughts on that, but I'll maintain them. But I think one of them is that, because it comes up a lot. People say like, "Oh, what chords do I use?" Or what, and it's like, well, what are you trying to say? What are we going for here? Because I don't know. It could be any chord. So I think that's kind of where you're going is too. Is like, in theory, if you're getting stuck, you're probably paralyzed of like, oh, there's so many things I could do here. I don't know which path to take. But really, it's like, well, there's only so many paths you should take if you're focused on the story, I guess.
Yeah, Rupert would always really get into that about like, he's a big fan of like being really specific with like his inversions. And it's like, you don't need more than a few chords, but you want to just make sure that they're very intentional and very voiced in a certain way. And yeah, I mean, he can do so much with so little. And that was something that, coming in as like this Berklee hotshot person is like, oh, actually, this is an amazing cue. And there's only 3 or 4 chords, but
doesn't he know about 5 too? Right.
Yeah, exactly. Come on, I want to add 9 and 11 in there.
But maybe along this train of thought,
I love you.
Have you ever come up with 2 themes for one score you're writing? Both of them sound completely different. How do you logically transition? So I guess that's assuming you're using both themes. There's a couple questions kind of in there, I guess.
They're great. They're all great. I have so many thoughts. Well, what was your interpretation, though? I have a couple of thoughts, but
well, at first I took it to mean 2 different paths you want to take for the same cue.
Yeah.
But then I guess it's like, oh, if you come up with multiple different ideas and you're able to use them both, how do you make that work?
Yeah, I did that on Spirit. There are 2 themes for the mom. It's like the one that sort of came early and one that came later. And actually there was a thing, not to get too into the weeds, but I did not, so I auditioned for Spirit. I pitched for Spirit, and did not get it. They hired someone else.
Oh.
This actually happened initially. And then that person got fired and I came in and did the rest of Spirit. So they only did a few episodes, but for the pitch for Spirit, I wrote a theme. I wrote a main theme for Lucky, for the main character. And it was a really good theme. I really liked it. It was like a 32 bar, like it really developed and it was this whole thing. And after that, there were several months where I just went back to doing what I was doing, and I did a library track with that theme. So I basically sold that theme, and then I got Spirit, and I was like, "Oh, I had the best thing." So, I literally was like, "Well, I gotta try to beat it or do something else."
Wow.
I didn't sell the really good. There was a main one, this track called First Ride that's on my website and is all throughout Spirit. It's like the Spirit theme. I didn't get rid of that one, and I leaned on that very heavily. But so anyway, so sometimes you just have to do that. That's not quite the question. But I wrote 2 themes for the mom, and one was kind of a slow, kind of like it kind of this like kind of melancholy, because it's like missing mom, like it's the memory of her and seeing a picture on the wall. And I wrote this theme and it got used a lot in the film or in the show, but later on, and I didn't know this because it's such a long process, there are flashbacks to the mom when she's alive and stuff, and that's not going to work because you're not missing mom when there's an episode where it's her as a child and stuff. And so I wrote this much more active kind of like Spanish thing, but it sort of ended up being kind of a minor version, very loosely, of the main Spirit theme. But those were very different. And I think again, it just comes back to the words. Like I can totally imagine with that question, like you do something real aggressive and cool for this movie, and then there's like a heart to it, and you do something very ethereal, and they both work for a character because there's layers, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a great thing to do, and I think it just because you want contrast. Like art and music in particular, like can't exist without contrast. If you got a fast section, a slow section, a high section, a low section, like that's what makes music and art interesting. And I think it's just figuring out what aspect of the different themes is in use at any one time. So the missing mom versus mom on the run, mom doing, these things, and those, you can cut those apart and interplay them, like do the aggressive one in a very ethereal way, like take that aggressive theme, try and mix and match them and see what you come up with. That's where good ideas come from. I feel like a synthesis. It's like you take two or three things that are very different and find ways to show them together. So I don't know. I love that question. I think it's great. I think that is where the I don't know, that's where the magic happens usually, is that synthesis.
Nice. That's good. Angel asked, so we talked about software already, that Cubase is your main thing. How about notation software? Do you ever?
Notation software, I was a Finale guy for years and years and years. And I know they discontinued it.
Yeah.
I know. But during Rupert's time, I started getting into Sibelius, and so I've gotten pretty good at Sibelius. Mm-hmm. That being said, my whole corpus, my whole work from like whatever age 13 to 22 is all in Finale. So I have to have a computer with Finale on it to like export MIDI, to go read it and stuff. But I guess I won't write in Finale anymore. But yeah, I
32 years on Finale.
Yeah,
that's gonna take a minute. Yeah, that hurts.
Get an old computer, an old Mac or something, and just don't connect it to the internet, and just put on there. Seriously, I have an old Mac Studio or Mac Pro down there. I'm thinking of just having it be like this is the one that if I ever need to open up a thing,
just never. Yeah. So you don't intend to just take like a long weekend and transfer everything. It's just as you feel inspired, you'll go look for stuff. I
have been in bursts, very organized over the course of my life, and have a folder that's just called My Life's Work, that is like all of that stuff. Nice. Obviously that doesn't entail all of the way. I don't write that way as much anymore, but there's Finale Notepad, so it's like I'm not editing things necessarily, but if I find, there was that thing I wrote, I'll go and I'll export the MIDI or something, and then I'll do what you said, like just transfer it over. But
are you using notation for any reason other than live players? Like, do you write notation wise?
Not really. Although, so if I am writing notation just for myself, I'll just do it. I've got these like Ticonderoga pencils over there and stuff. Occasionally I'll just write a thing down. But generally, I got really good in Cubase of like, there's the score editor, and I don't write it, but they're little MIDI flags at the beginning, like the burst, of CC automation at the beginning. And I went through painstakingly over hundreds and hundreds of tracks, making those flags represent the clefs, like the viola opens up and the, alto and stuff. So, if I want to, it'll be messy, but I'm also pretty organized with it, where I'll just sometimes look at it in Cubase. Like I did what you said about Finale going to Sibelius. I went through Cubase and made it so that it would actually look like something with notation if I wanted to. I don't use it that way sometimes, but it was worth it. It was really worth it to like see the strings and they actually look like strings instead of just scribble. Nice.
All right, I'm going to end us on one last question.
Sure.
Because this is related to your process, I think, a lot. Especially with you're building your own custom sounds. So do you look for sounds to inspire you, or does inspiration make you look for those sounds?
Oh man, I love that. Both. I'm trying to think of good examples for both. I think
like when you're about to start something, it sounds like you were like, oh, let's go get a tennis racket. I don't know. That's so interesting. It's like,
yeah, and not only that, we had the tennis player. Like we have like hitting a thing out there. I should put those up. I should find a way to play some of those things out. The project is called Playing to Survive. It's on PBS. I think it is either released soon or whatever, but it has some of those sounds. Like you hear that, so it kind of sounds like a spring reverb. But but the question, what I loved about that question was it was the transitive property, right? Does A go to B or B go to A? And so do sounds inspire you? Like on Piglet, I think that was a great example where I had a bit of time where I had read the script and they were still shooting, and so getting those. So my idea was, okay, squeals. What are things that squeal? And I mean, there's multiple things, but I chose 3, and one was, like I said, the bass clarinet played high, or the altissimo, fat things played high. Like that was my thought. But it was also guitar feedback, and it was also modular synths. So I have this little, I don't know if it's in here, like a Korg monotron. It's the tiny little, and it's made these, and I tried to make them sound like each other. So I don't know. I mean, that is an example of inspiration making me look for sounds. I think it's like asking myself, I think that is an example of the other direction, rather than saying like, "Ooh, that's a big drum sound. How can I use that?"
Right.
Maybe.
But maybe in the case of your bowl, you're gonna be.
Yeah.
Gets you. Yeah.
That can be true. That can be true. I mean, I've sampled like. Actually, the drum thing is a good example. I don't know if anyone knows, like they have those things, where you hang by your legs, like for your back, like gravity inversion tables or whatever.
Yeah.
I was visiting my parents' house in Tennessee many years ago, and my dad had one of those, and it had a big like canvas back, and I just had a stereo Zoom recorder, and I like made this. It's like a big skin, like a big Viking drum, and I did that before I moved to LA. I had just recorded that before I moved to LA, and I still use it. And I did this project called Dead Men, and it was like a Western, and it just sounded like this big dusty buffalo hide. And I was like, that's the sound. But I had just done it on its own. And then some connection, you're doing this thing like, what would sound really good is like the inversion table from my parents' house in Tennessee.
Right. Of course. You're right. Naturally.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So all of that, you never know what's gonna be useful. So you just become this magpie and like put all your stuff together, in a folder, and then eventually it will be useful, whether or not you're scrolling through, listening to it, and you get an idea, or you're watching a movie and say, you know what, I should go grab that, whatever, that kitty cup mug that I'm playing with spoons or whatever, whatever it is, that you'll find it. You'll find that thing. I don't know if anyone's like a hoarder like me or whatever, but you just find a little, I'm so glad I kept that random screw that nobody knew about, because now I need it. And it's that one spot, in the house that needed that screw.
Right. So you have dad instincts with your sounds. And you're like, I got to keep this.
Exactly.
Right.
Full dad instincts. Yeah,
right. Yeah. That's good. All right. Well, I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you, everybody, for asking questions. That's what keeps us going. It's awesome.
Great stuff.
Really appreciate it. And James, thank you so much for doing this. It was really fun. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Appreciate it.
Bye, everybody. Thank you. At the end.